After such a talkative turn last turn, I expected to see a little more action in the press this turn that was relevant to me, but actually, it was relatively quiet. The French player, I think, was busy with other things and didn't send very much press. The English player seems to have given up and didn't try to talk to me. And the Austrian and Russian seemed to have already made up their mind on what they wanted to do and didn't negotiate with me that much. The Italian player tried to get some influence going, but all these things sort of leave everyone beyond influence. So I spent most of the time haggling with the Russian player about how we would move our pieces to take the English centers in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. There's really not a lot of bargaining power that I have since England disbanded in such a way that pretty much lets Russia just walk in and take two of those centers, which of course makes Russia incredibly powerful considering that Russia already controls effectively all the Turkish home centers and has two corners now. But there's not a whole lot I can do about that since the Austrian doesn't really seem to care about fighting the Russian, and I'm not about to fight that player by myself. So after going back and forth a little bit, I settled with the Russian player on bouncing our armies at Warsaw, Munich, and Silesia, and that I would move my fleet into Baltic Sea and my army at Berlin into Kiel so that I can make a supported attack on Denmark for sure in the autumn and make a capture. And the Russian player agreed to move in such a way that it would at least be possible for him to have his fleet in Norway at the end of autumn. We'll see if he keeps to that. If the Russian player's fleet is in Sweden and Norway is held with an army, then I would bet so much that the Russian player is about to attack me next, and that's just what's going to happen. But if the Russian player's fleet is in Norway and has an army in Sweden at the end of the year, then that can't be attacked so easily that way, and it makes it seem like that player will play ball on going after centers in Great Britain after that. We'll see. There's not that much I can do. I've settled on those moves. I got the French player to agree to support me in Belgium, and I'm going to hit North Sea with Holland just to see what happens. Don't expect that to matter. I think that the Austrian player is really foolish for saying that he's not going to attack the Russian player when he has this chance. He has a chance to bring the Russian player down to size a little bit. And I tried to talk to the player about it. Doesn't really seem to care. And that's a shame. I think that in the end, we're going to pay a heavy price for the Austrian player's high level of loyalty, inappropriate level of loyalty, I think, to the Russian. Oh me, oh my, what a turn to try to summarize. For those of you who've been following along, maybe this will help explain how I'm making these recordings a little bit. I am recording these at the end of the turn, shortly before I get to find out what the players have actually decided what to do. So for this turn in particular, so much happened that it's difficult for me to decide how to talk about it, where to start, what details to leave in, and so on. So I'll start with what is maybe the most dramatic aspect of this turn. So the Italian player sent messages to players, including myself early on, asking to speak with them outside the parameters of the app we're using to play the game. We're playing this diplomacy match on Backstabber, and early on we received information from the game master encouraging us or maybe admonishing us to send all our messages from within the app itself so that the game master could monitor what's going on, since after all this exhibition match is being played to produce content so that people can understand what we were thinking and what happened and the in-depth analysis of the match. I respected this, and finding out that maybe some of the players weren't doing this, possibly at the instigation of the Italian player, really threw me for a loop. I got really frustrated with this from my point of view and my experience playing online diplomacy. This is a rules violation. I would call this cheating. I don't care that if the players did anything untowards while they were communicating outside the parameters of the app we're using to play the game, but when we agreed to use an app that includes a messaging system, and to restrict our messages to that app so that they can be monitored, it feels to me like that's cheating. It's per se a rules violation. In the world that I come from of web diplomacy, communicating outside the game itself about the game can definitely get you in trouble with the moderators. So I was flabbergasted to find out that this was going on and that some players wanted to talk to me this way. And just as I started putting my foot down, or whatever authority I have, I mean, the only real recourse I have to rules violations is to threaten to quit playing the game. Just as I was starting to do that, the Italian player resigned. It seems that he had some personal issues or something constraining his time, and that's really unfortunate. Sorry to hear that. It's always unfortunate when somebody's unable to play diplomacy because of some personal issues. Usually it's pretty serious because people who play diplomacy really love it. So then that player had to be replaced just as we were reaching the crescendo of my conflict about how I wanted to approach the game versus how this player wanted to approach the game. And we got a substitute, a player who is known to me. And at this point, the anonymity of the game has been pretty much disregarded. There's not much of that going on anymore. For my part, I am trying to refer to the players by the country they're playing, and I do that for the most part in my press. I guess it's just a formality at this point when most of us know who each other is, but we agreed to play the game with anonymous rules, so I'm continuing to honor that in spirit if in fact we know who the players are. So the Italian players switched from a person who mostly is from the press diplomacy world and has a very different style to a very successful online diplomacy player, indeed one that has contributed to the BrotherBored website, and who I consider to be a superior player to myself by a pretty big margin. Now, tactically, this situation was quite a cluster, as they say, where the former Italian player, at the last moment it seems, panicked, changed his orders, told other players that he was changing his orders, blah, blah, blah. I fully expected him to prop up the French player. I think the French player did as well. But with his changed orders to abandon the French player's defenses and telling the English player that he was doing so, or causing the English player to know this, gave the English player this really huge tactical advantage that he took advantage of. I can't criticize him for that. So now, looking at the board after the players had changed, I see a situation in which France is in a very bad situation, and England's a little stronger than I thought England was going to be. And the Italian player, who I was thinking about trying to find a way to get a little revenge there for this style of play that I really didn't care for, especially with changing orders and whatnot. But with a new player in charge, it's kind of hard to feel, okay, I don't care about retaliating for something another person did, doesn't really matter. So, the game master gave extended time for the players to acquaint with each other and assess their situation. A lot went down as the players tried to understand what are their strategic options, and I'll go with each one in order of perhaps what I consider to be the importance of those conversations. I spent a lot of time trying to talk to the new Italian player about what we're going to do, especially because I know him and I know him to be reasonable and a player who, especially since we're playing two powers that are not in conflict, we could work together. After we went around and around, we didn't come up with too many good ideas other than that he would try to defend himself as best he can. The main problem that I have is that I really want to destroy the English player. Since the English player worked out an alliance with me early on that I thought was meant to last for a while, and then that player backstabbed me over what I consider to be a backstab over one supply center, I no longer trust that player at all. I consider that player to be someone who will make greedy, selfish moves and can't think about the long-term consequences politically of their actions, and I'd rather just see that player destroyed and see where the game takes me. So that forces me to work with Russia and not attack Russia once I have that assumption, and it doesn't give me much much else to do in terms of my tactics. So I planned from the beginning of the turn to support my fleet at Baltic Sea into Denmark, and that never changed. I decided to hold Belgium with Holland, and that never changed over the course of the turn. The only thing that I really wondered what I should do is to move Munich. How should I move it? Should I try to move it to Tyrolia to interfere with Austria? Should I attack France? I pondered that for a moment and ruled it out. Back to Russia, I wondered if I should bounce Russia in Silesia. Well, Russia said that he's planning to cede Romania to Austria and is going to move his armies into Galicia and from Warsaw to Ukraine. Well, if that's true, then there's no reason for me to ask for a bounce, as that's quite favorable to me. It finally moves an army away from our border area. So I agreed not to bounce with Munich. And I never came up with anything better to do with Munich either. So I left that unit to hold. I think that the French player's position is in shambles. I don't think that that player is going to recover pretty much no matter what happens. I gave the French player my assurances that I wouldn't attack, and that's true. That I would attack England to help them out, and that's true. And that I predicted that England would attack them more. And that was my honest assessment about what England would do. I hope the French player does okay. I'm really not sure what will happen. The Austrian player and I talked at length finally, or at more than usual, and the Austrian player made it very clear that he wanted to work with Russia, that there was no two ways about it, and wanted me to work with Russia as well, which I find very strange because most players are trying to undermine their ally somehow. I would expect most Austrian players in that position to be encouraging me to attack Russia. So this furthers my assessment that the Austrian player is a little too allied to the player and not ruthless enough. The new Italian player talked to Austria quite a lot and came back to me with the same assessment. It doesn't seem like there's anything to break them apart. So from my point of view, I don't see a reason to begin attacking either Austria or Russia, as it seems like one will come to the aid of the other, and they are working pretty well with me. I told my plans to a few players. I think I described it loosely to France and Italy, that my plan is to try to capture some centers while I can. Maybe Russia really will help me get English centers, and then if I'm stronger, I can reassess the situation and see what happens in the north. Maybe I can fight Russia, maybe I'll need to fight Austria if Austria gets stronger somehow. Austria is telling me, hey, look, I understand, I know that Russia will eventually become a threat to me, but Russia hasn't lied to me yet, so I want to keep working together, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure what to think of that. That's what I want to hear. Yes, I want to hear that Austria is going to fight Russia soon, but I don't know if I believe it. So I end the turn with a lot of uncertainty about what will happen. What will be the tactical outcome of a fight between England and France? Will one of them do something unexpected and attack me? Will they join forces? France said no, but I really am not sure. Will Russia set up to attack me the following year, or will Russia plan to go after England? Will Austria or Russia backstab the other, despite what I've heard to the contrary? Will something funny happen with how Italy moves? I just don't know. And I'm really excited to see what happens next. Well, contrary to my worries, before the turn ended, I came to the board and saw that pretty much every player moved in a way that I predicted and hoped for. So I entered the winter turn feeling pretty good that I have good rapport with the players, I understand their intentions, and most of the moves were exactly as I wanted. The Russian player moved a fleet into Norway and away from a position to attack me. The Russian army moved out of Warsaw. Russia ceded a center to Austria, so their balance of power is a little bit maintained. That all looked pretty good to me in that area of the board. And the French player managed to dupe the English player. There was a failed convoy, and the French player didn't lose any builds. The English player was devastated by the turn and reduced down to just 3 supply centers. That all worked right. The Italian player is starting to crumble, even with the extra French support at Piedmont. It's not happening. It's not going to last long with the combined Russian-Austrian attack. But nothing disastrous happened. So I spent the turn trying to figure out what the other players were going to build. I pretty much the whole time it seemed to me that the Russian player was going to build an army in Moscow and a fleet in St. Petersburg North Coast. That's consistent with what we had talked about earlier. And I decided that I would build a fleet in Berlin, since that gave me the option of attacking Russia if necessary at Scandinavia, and otherwise was the build that Russia requested. So no matter what I do, that seems like the way to go. An army would probably antagonize Russia, especially after our earlier conversations. I put some effort into finding out if I could convince the Austrian to build at Budapest instead of Vienna, to help me feel a little safer that maybe there's not going to be some sudden attack by Austria and Russia against me. And the Austrian agreed to do this, so I don't see why not, why that wouldn't be true. And the most interesting thing that happened is that the English player reached out to me about destroying France. So the French player lying to the English player really worked out for me here. It may have generated a friend for me in England. So for my part, by not really talking to England very much and not trying to lie my way into an advantage in fighting England, I seem to have curried the player's favor at least a little bit, because I'm really the only person who can help them take out France, who England seems to really want to destroy. They asked me, said, I have nothing left to do but destroy France. Will you help me out? And I said yes. So I think the English player is going to disband the units in the north that are near me, including North Sea, so that they can continue to get revenge against France. This is something I want to take advantage of. Meanwhile, the Italian and French player are starting to despair. They probably don't think they can trust me much anymore. They definitely got worried messages from them. Are you really going to work with us? You know, how can we make it against Russia and Austria, etc. I said everything I could to reassure them. I have no reason to let them on to my idea that I'm continuing to work with Austria and Russia indefinitely. There's no advantage to me there. And if the English player decides to seek so much revenge against France, France may have no choice but to continue to trust me. And certainly I didn't attack France at any point. I didn't attack France last turn. What I am hoping for here is that the English player will attack France in such a way that renders France vulnerable to an attack by me, and then I'll have an opportunity to pick up a French center somewhere, maybe Paris, and mop up the abandoned English centers, or at least some of them, depending on what I have to give to Russia. And that will give me much needed builds and less threats, so that I can perhaps actually defend myself somewhat against Russia and Austria and enter the endgame as a player who can't really easily be eliminated. If this all goes according to plan, a plan that I talked about at length with England, actually, we had some rapport left, I see. And this plan is that I will try to enter the endgame as one of the top 3 strongest powers and either get into a draw somehow, or somebody goes for a solo win and we see what happens after that. And that's not a bad endgame for me to enter into. I'm pretty used to it. I'm pretty good at dealing with an endgame situation with 3 moderately sized powers. That's pretty typical in a well-played game of diplomacy. So I expect the English player to disband those units in the north, Russia to build in Moscow and St. Petersburg. I'm going to build in Berlin. I expect Austria to build in Budapest. And after talking to the Italian and giving my advice, I expect the Italian to disband in Apulia. Let's see what happens next.